A strict HOA mom calls the cops on a man she claims threatened her son, only to find out he's the city's new police commander. This shocking encounter in a Phoenix grocery store parking lot spirals into a viral story that no one saw coming. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of a grocery store parking lot in Phoenix, Arizona, the sun dropping low enough to cast long streaks across the blacktop. It should be a simple Thursday evening. Families pushing carts, kids tugging at their parents' sleeves, the smell of fresh tortillas drifting from the store's bakery. But instead, a tense standoff is brewing right by the cart return. A teenage boy about 16 stands planted like he owns the place. His face is red, not just from the heat, but from frustration. He's pointing at the bags in another man's cart. Bags filled with eggs, chicken, milk, bread. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the boy is barking out an order that stops several people in their tracks. "You're supposed to give us some of that. That's how it works around here." The man he's talking to doesn't flinch. He stands tall, shoulders squared, dressed casually in jeans and a short-sleeve polo. He's calm, but his presence commands attention. His name is Desmond Carrington, and unknown to most of the people watching, he's the newly appointed commander of the Phoenix Police Department. He and his family just moved into the neighborhood a week earlier, hoping for peace, hoping for a fresh start. Desmond looks at the boy, his voice steady but firm. "Son, that's not how things work. These groceries are for my family. Nobody owes you anything." Gasps ripple through the onlookers. Some shake their heads, others whisper. A few even pull out their phones, sensing something is about to happen. The boy's entitlement is bold, almost rehearsed, as if this isn't the first time he's demanded something from a stranger. But here's the thing. This isn't just any teenager. This is Brandon Haskins, the son of Corinne Haskins, a name that carries weight inside their gated community. Corinne is on the HOA board, and she's built a reputation for being the kind of neighbor who notices if your trash can is 1 inch too far from the curb. People in the neighborhood call her strict. Others use harsher words. Brandon has grown up under her watch, confident that whatever he does, his mother will defend him. Desmond doesn't move, doesn't budge. Instead, he leans slightly on his cart, keeping his eyes locked on Brandon. "Young man, I suggest you step aside and head home. This isn't the kind of lesson you want to learn the hard way." Brandon scoffs, kicking at the asphalt. "You're new here. You don't get it. Every new neighbor has to give something up. My mom says it's tradition." Desmond's eyes narrow. He doesn't raise his voice, but the authority is unmistakable. "Tradition or not, extortion is not how communities build respect. Go home." For a moment, silence hangs between them. The crowd thickens, a mix of curiosity and tension, as if they're watching a fuse inch toward a stick of dynamite. Brandon's phone buzzes in his pocket. He grabs it, storms off a few steps, and dials. His voice carries across the parking lot. "Mom, you need to get down here now. Some guy's refusing to do the tradition thing. He's being aggressive with me." Several bystanders glance at Desmond, then back at Brandon. Aggressive? Desmond hasn't even moved an inch. But everyone knows how quickly stories twist when emotions flare. Within minutes, a silver SUV screeches into the lot. The door swings open, and out steps Corinne Haskins herself. Mid-40s, sharp suit despite the late hour, sunglasses pushed up on her head even though the sun is fading. Her heels click against the pavement as she marches toward her son, her voice rising before she even reaches him. "Brandon, are you okay? What happened? Did this man put his hands on you?" Brandon shakes his head but points at Desmond with wide eyes. "He threatened me, Mom. I told him what you always say, and he wouldn't listen. He got in my face." Corinne's glare fixes on Desmond. She doesn't stop to ask his side. She doesn't notice the calm look in his eyes or the fact that he hasn't moved from his cart. In her mind, her son's word is gospel. "You!" she snaps, her voice sharp enough to slice through the noise of the lot. "Who do you think you are talking to my child like that?" Desmond exhales slowly. He could explain. He could tell her what really happened. But her tone tells him she isn't interested in truth, only control. And so, with a tilt of her chin and a phone already in hand, Corinne makes a choice that will change the course of the evening, the reputation of her family, and the conversation in the entire neighborhood. She dials 911. But the moment the call is placed, the situation takes a turn she never could have predicted. Corinne's phone is pressed tight against her ear, her words sharp and clipped, as if she's reciting a script she's performed before. "Yes, hello. I'm in the Fry's parking lot off Indian School Road. There's a man here. Yes, a black man. He's threatening my son. He's refusing to leave us alone. I need officers here immediately." Around her, people exchange looks. Some glance at Desmond, who's standing motionless by his cart. Others look at Corinne, noting the tremor of self-righteous fury in her voice. Desmond doesn't interrupt. He doesn't raise his hands or try to plead with her. He simply watches, his jaw set, his silence heavier than words. Brandon clings to his mother's side, milking the moment. "See, Mom? That's the guy. He wouldn't give me anything. He said I had no right to ask." Corinne pulls the phone away from her ear long enough to whisper, "Don't worry, sweetie. We'll handle this. Nobody talks to you like that." In that one sentence, the depth of her conviction shows. Corinne Haskins has built her identity on control. The HOA meetings where she polices the length of grass on front lawns, the snide notes she leaves on mailboxes if a car is parked a few inches too far from the curb, all of it comes from the same place, the belief that her word carries weight. And tonight, in front of dozens of strangers, she refuses to let that weight falter. "Officers are on their way," she declares, loud enough for everyone around to hear. Her eyes bore into Desmond. "So, you'd better have a very good explanation ready." Desmond finally speaks. His tone is calm, almost too calm for the circumstances. "Ma'am, I don't owe you or your son my groceries. That's not how respect works." He demanded. "I refused. That's all there is to it." Corinne laughs bitterly, shaking her head. "Oh, that's all? You intimidate a minor in broad daylight, and you expect me to believe you're just shopping? Don't insult me." "Intimidate," Desmond repeats, a flicker of disbelief passing across his face. "I didn't lay a finger on him. I told him no, that's it." The crowd is growing thicker. Some record, some whisper. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap steps forward. "Ma'am, with all respect, I saw the whole thing. That boy was out of line. The man didn't threaten him." Corinne's head snaps toward him, her eyes flashing. "Excuse me? Do you even live in our community? Mind your business." The man backs away, muttering under his breath. Brandon tugs at her arm. "Mom, stop wasting time with these people. He doesn't belong here. Just let the cops deal with him." Those words hang in the air. He doesn't belong here. Several people in the crowd flinch at the implication, their eyes shifting back to Desmond, then to Corinne. But she either doesn't notice or doesn't care. Inside, though, a subtle nervousness prickles at her chest. She has called the police before, on neighbors for barking dogs, on teenagers for riding bikes after dark. She knows the drill. But something about this man's posture, his steady calmness, unsettles her. Most people would be flustered, pleading, defensive. Not him. He stands like someone who knows something she doesn't. She tries to brush it off, straightening her blazer. "This won't take long," she mutters to herself. Desmond, meanwhile, pulls out his own phone. He doesn't dial, just scrolls, waiting. His wife, Angela Carrington, and their teenage daughter, Simone, walk out of the grocery store, each holding a bag. They freeze when they see the crowd, Angela's eyes darting from Desmond to Corinne. "What's going on?" Angela asks, setting her bags down on the pavement. Desmond's answer is plain. "Our neighbor's son thought he was entitled to our groceries. His mother decided I was the problem." Angela stares at Corinne, confusion etched across her face. "You called the police? For this?" Corinne folds her arms, standing taller. "I protect my son, always. If you don't like how we do things here, maybe this isn't the neighborhood for you." Angela's voice sharpens. "We moved here for peace, for safety, and the first thing your boy does is try to take what doesn't belong to him?" Simone clutches her mother's arm, her young voice breaking in. "Mom, can we just go home? This is crazy!" But it's too late. The wail of sirens cuts through the parking lot, distant at first, but growing louder, closer, until the flashing lights appear at the edge of the lot. Squad cars roll in, tires crunching over gravel, headlights slicing through the crowd. People instinctively pull out their phones again, some whispering, others flat out narrating to their cameras. Corinne smiles, confident, almost triumphant. Good. Finally. Let's see how this man explains himself now. But the moment the officers step out and recognize who they're dealing with, Corinne's certainty starts to crack. The first squad car comes to a stop right in front of the cart return, lights flashing red and blue against the walls of the grocery store. Two officers step out quickly, their radios crackling, hands resting near their belts. The crowd parts slightly, giving them a clear path toward Corinne, Brandon, and Desmond. Corinne waves them over like she's summoning waiters at a restaurant. "Officers, over here! That's him right there. That's the man who threatened my son." Brandon nods furiously, pointing at Desmond. "Yeah, he came at me. He wouldn't give me what I asked for. He said I didn't deserve it." Both officers glance in Desmond's direction, and their posture shifts almost instantly. The rigid, ready-for-trouble stance softens, replaced with recognition. One of them, a tall officer with sandy hair, speaks first. "Commander Carrington?" Desmond gives a slow nod. "Evening, gentlemen," the crowd murmurs. Some raise their phones higher, recording every word. Corinne's eyes narrow in confusion. "Wait, what? You know him?" The shorter officer, a woman with her dark hair pulled back tightly, looks at her but doesn't answer. Instead, she addresses Desmond directly. "Sir, is everything all right here?" Desmond gestures lightly toward Brandon and Corinne. "It's a misunderstanding. This young man demanded I hand over my groceries as part of some neighborhood tradition. I refused. His mother showed up, decided I was the threat, and called you." Corinne interrupts, her voice high and cutting. "That's not what happened. My son was terrified. This man, this stranger, loomed over him. He's lying to save face." The female officer looks back at Desmond, then at Angela and Simone standing nearby. Angela steps forward, her voice steady but sharp. "No, my husband didn't threaten anyone. Your boy thought he could intimidate us into giving up our food. When he didn't get his way, he ran to you." Simone blurts out, unable to hold it in. "He was bullying my dad. Everyone saw it." A man from the crowd, the same one in the baseball cap who spoke earlier, raises his voice. "She's lying. I saw the whole thing. That kid was out of line. This man didn't lay a hand on him." Corinne spins toward the man, her face red with fury. "Mind your business. You don't live in our community, do you? You don't get a say." The taller officer clears his throat, stepping in between them. "Ma'am, let's slow down. We all need to stay calm here." But calm is the last thing on Corinne's mind. Her son is watching, the crowd is filming, and her authority, her control, is slipping. She points a finger at Desmond, her words sharp and accusatory. "I don't care who you are. You don't belong here. My son told me what happened, and I believe him. Officers, I demand you remove this man from the premises." The female officer glances at her partner, an awkward silence stretching between them. Finally, she says, "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not how this works." Corinne blinks, stunned. "Excuse me." The tall officer sighs. "Commander Carrington is our superior. He's the head of this department. We know him personally, and from what we're hearing, he hasn't committed any crime." The crowd erupts in whispers, phones zooming in closer. Corinne's confidence falters, her mouth opening and closing without words. Brandon stares at her, his bravado fading. "Mom, what?" Desmond finally breaks his silence, his voice calm but cutting. "Mrs. Haskins, I gave your son a simple answer. No. That's it. He turned it into something it wasn't. And now you've escalated this into a scene." Angela crosses her arms, her glare fixed on Corinne. "This is harassment, plain and simple. You didn't ask what happened. You assumed. And now look where it got you." Corinne's face flushes a deep crimson. She looks around, realizing every angle of her outrage is being recorded. Dozens of phones capture her every word, every expression. There will be no hiding this later. Desmond steps closer, but not in aggression, in quiet authority. "This community will get to know me in time. But tonight, you decided to paint me as a threat before even learning my name. That says more about you than it does about me." For the first time, Corinne has no response. Brandon shifts uncomfortably at her side, eyes darting between his mother and the officers who are now watching him with thinly veiled judgment. The tall officer clears his throat again. "Commander, would you like us to take a formal statement?" Desmond shakes his head. "No. Let's not waste more resources than we already have. I think the community has witnessed enough for tonight." He grabs the grocery bags from his cart, hands one to Angela, and puts an arm around Simone's shoulder. Together they start walking toward their car. The crowd parts for them, quiet except for the soft whir of phones still recording. Corinne is left standing by the cart return, her authority shattered, her son silent beside her. She tries to muster one last shred of control, shouting after them, "This isn't over! You can't just walk away from this!" Desmond doesn't even turn around. His voice carries across the lot, firm and steady. "I already did." But once the Carringtons drive off, the real damage begins, not in the parking lot, but online. The parking lot seemed to pulse with a strange energy after Desmond and his family drove off. People lingered near their cars, whispering, replaying video clips, sharing what they had just witnessed, as if it needed to be processed out loud to feel real. Corinne stood frozen, her phone still in her hand, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Brandon shifted uncomfortably, staring at the ground, wishing for once that the earth would swallow him whole. The two officers remained by their cruiser, exchanging glances. The female officer finally approached Corinne. "Ma'am, I need to be frank with you. What you reported doesn't match what we saw when we arrived, or what witnesses here are saying." Corinne stiffened. "Are you calling me a liar?" The officer held her gaze. "I'm saying your account doesn't align with the facts. We can't take action against someone just because you don't like the answer they gave your son," the tall officer added carefully. "And considering who Commander Carrington is, this incident will not disappear quietly. People are already recording. If you continue down this path, it may create bigger consequences for you than you realize." That word, consequences, hit Corinne like a dart. She prided herself on being the one who enforced consequences, not the one who faced them. Her instinct was to double down, to stand taller, to insist that she was right. But her eyes darted to the crowd. Neighbors. Strangers. Phones aimed at her from every direction. For the first time in years, she felt exposed. Brandon whispered at her side, his voice shaking. "Mom, maybe we should just go home." She snapped her head toward him. "Go home? After what he did? After the way he spoke to you?" Brandon swallowed hard. "But everyone saw it. He didn't do anything. He just said no." Corinne's mouth went dry. She wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat. Her son's honesty betrayed her carefully constructed version of events, and she realized too late that the narrative she had spun to the dispatcher had already crumbled in front of dozens of witnesses. Meanwhile, the crowd began to disperse, though not without a few muttered comments. A woman with a stroller muttered, "Always has to stir things up." A man in a button-down shirt added, "This is going to be all over Facebook tonight." Corinne could feel the walls of her reputation closing in. Her status as the enforcer of rules, the woman who set the tone for their neighborhood, was slipping. She wanted to grab her phone and delete the past 10 minutes from everyone's memory, but the reality was obvious. This story was no longer hers to control. The female officer gave her one last look. "I suggest you head home, Mom, for your own sake." And with that, the officers returned to their cruiser, speaking quietly into their radios before pulling away. The flashing lights vanished into the street, leaving Corinne and Brandon standing awkwardly in the middle of the lot, their audience thinning by the minute. For the ride home, silence filled Corinne's empty SUV. Brandon sat with his arms crossed, staring out the window. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him. He had never seen his mother lose control before. Not like this. "Why didn't you just let it go?" he asked finally, his voice soft but cutting. Corinne gripped the wheel tighter. "Because no one disrespects this family, especially not some man who thinks he can—" She stopped, catching herself, the words sour on her tongue. She wasn't sure if she believed them anymore. Brandon shook his head. "He didn't disrespect us. I was the one who— I thought that's how things worked. You always say new people need to know their place. The admission hit Corinne harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to correct him, to soften it, but the truth stung too much. She had been the one teaching him these attitudes, through her comments at HOA meetings, her late-night rants about outsiders moving in, her obsession with control. And now, here it was, staring her in the face through her son's words. When they pulled into their driveway, a neighbor across the street was already watching from their porch. Corinne could feel it. The eyes, the whispers, the judgment. Her control over this neighborhood was slipping, one look at a time. Inside the house, she shut the door behind them and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Brandon dropped his backpack by the stairs and muttered, "This is going to blow up online, isn't it?" Corinne closed her eyes. She knew he was right, but she had no idea just how quickly the footage from that parking lot would spread, and how brutal the reaction would be once the world saw it. By the time Corinne set her phone on the kitchen counter later that night, the first videos were already circulating. She hadn't even changed out of her work blazer before notifications started pinging on Brandon's phone. TikTok clips, Facebook shares, local Twitter accounts reposting the confrontation with captions like, "HOA board member calls cops on police commander at Fry's." Brandon hovered over his screen, scrolling frantically. "Mom, it's everywhere. Look at this one. Already 5,000 views." Corinne grabbed the phone, her hands trembling. On the screen, there she was, pointing her finger at Desmond, her voice shrill as she demanded the officers remove him. The caption underneath burned in her eyes. Entitled "HOA Mom Tries to Weaponize Cops, Backfires Spectacularly." She slammed the phone on the counter. "People don't know the full story. They don't know what really happened." Brandon stared at her, voice low. "They know enough." The comment sections were merciless. Words like racist, control freak, power trip appeared again and again. Some commenters dug up her name from HOA records and added fuel. A few even screenshotted the neighborhood's public Facebook page, where Corinne's posts about maintaining standards were suddenly resurfacing with new meaning. Corinne's phone buzzed. It was an HOA colleague, Richard Lomax, his voice tight with frustration. "Corinne, what did you do? Do you realize who that man was? That's Commander Carrington. He's the top of the police department. My God, you embarrassed the whole neighborhood." "I didn't know," Corinne shot back, pacing the kitchen. "He wasn't wearing a badge. He wasn't in uniform. He was threatening my son." Richard's voice dripped with exasperation. "I've already gotten 3 calls tonight. People want you removed from the board. They're furious. And you don't get it. This isn't just a neighborhood scandal anymore. This is citywide news." Corinne's stomach twisted. "Citywide? Already?" Brandon sank into a chair, staring at his shoes. "Mom, maybe we should apologize." Corinne spun toward him. "Apologize? To him? After the way he—" She stopped mid-sentence, the fight draining out of her. What exactly had he done? Refused groceries? Stood his ground, said no? She sat down across from Brandon, her eyes searching his. "Did he ever touch you? Did he threaten to hurt you?" Brandon shook his head slowly. "No, he just said no. And he looked serious. So I panicked." Corinne buried her face in her hands. For years she had built herself into the authority of their gated community, the one who set the rules, the one who called the shots. Now, all of it was slipping away, broadcast to thousands of strangers who had already judged her guilty. The next morning only confirmed it. News vans were parked outside the neighborhood entrance. Reporters shouted questions at passing cars. "Is this the neighborhood of Corinne Haskins? How do you feel about your HOA board calling the cops on a police commander?" Inside his office downtown, Commander Desmond Carrington sat at his desk, his phone buzzing non-stop with messages of support. Fellow officers, city council members, even residents he didn't know personally were reaching out. Some were angry for him. Others were relieved he'd handled it calmly. Angela leaned against the doorframe of his office, watching him scroll through the news on his laptop. "They're calling it the HOA grocery incident. You're all over the local stations." Desmond exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Not exactly how I wanted to introduce myself to the city. But people see the truth," Angela said softly. They saw how you kept calm. They saw how she jumped to conclusions. That means something. Simone, sitting cross-legged in a chair, chimed in. All the kids at school were talking about it already. They're saying Mom was right, that it shows what people like Mrs. Haskins do when they think they're in charge. Desmond shook his head. I didn't want to make an example out of anyone. I just wanted to buy groceries. Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, the example makes itself. Back in the neighborhood, Corinne couldn't escape the fallout. Her phone rang non-stop. Neighbors demanding explanations, board members threatening to vote her out, her sister calling from out of state begging her to stop checking the comments online. But the worst moment came that evening, when Brandon returned from school. He dropped his backpack by the door, his face pale. They filmed me too, he whispered. Kids in the hallway were laughing. They kept calling me grocery boy. Corinne felt something crack inside her. For the first time, she saw the cost not in terms of her reputation, but in her son's humiliation. He had parroted her words, her ideas, her sense of control, and now he was paying the price. She wanted to defend him. She wanted to explain it away. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had passed her need for control onto him, and now the whole world was holding a mirror up to it. But this was only the beginning. The storm online was spilling into real life, and soon the entire neighborhood would be forced to take sides. 2 days after the grocery store confrontation, the same Fry's parking lot looked more like a community forum than a place to buy milk and bread. Reporters still parked across the street, neighbors clustered in groups whispering, and conversations carried a sharp edge. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was judgment, thick in the air. Angela Carrington pulled into the lot with Desmond that Saturday morning, determined to show that their lives would continue as normal. Simone was with them, headphones in, trying to block out the stares. Desmond pushed the cart calmly, head held high, but the energy around them shifted wherever they walked. Some people greeted him with warmth, nodding or offering small smiles. Others turned away, pretending to be busy with their shopping bags. Inside, whispers followed. That's him, right? One woman murmured. The commander. Her friend leaned closer. And she's the one who called the cops. Can you believe it? By the time they reached checkout, it felt like every eye in the store was on them. But Desmond didn't break stride. He thanked the cashier, carried the bags with quiet dignity, and led his family back outside. Corinne, meanwhile, sat in her SUV at the far end of the lot, engine running, hands gripping the wheel. Brandon sat beside her, slumped low in his seat, dreading the idea of being seen. Do we really have to be here? He muttered. Corinne's lips tightened. We're not going to hide in our own neighborhood. People need to see that we're not afraid. But as soon as she spotted the Carringtons near their car, her resolve weakened. Cameras were already pointed in their direction. Several neighbors pulled out phones the moment they noticed Corinne step out of her vehicle. Brandon groaned under his breath. Mom, please, don't! She ignored him, walking briskly toward the Carringtons. Commander Carrington, she called out, her voice straining between politeness and control. Desmond paused, setting the bags in his trunk. He turned slowly, his eyes cool. Mrs. Haskins. Angela stood firm at his side, Simone clutching her hand. The tension drew people closer, some pretending to load groceries, others outright standing and watching. Corinne's tone wavered. I think we should clear the air. There's been a misunderstanding. Angela's laugh was short, bitter. A misunderstanding? You called the police on my husband in front of a crowd. You accused him of threatening your son. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a choice. Corinne's cheeks burned. I was protecting Brandon. He was shaken because he was caught being entitled. Desmond interrupted, his voice calm but sharp. He demanded what wasn't his, and instead of correcting him, you backed him up with a lie. That's the real problem here. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones rose higher. Corinne's voice faltered. I didn't lie. I thought... Brandon finally stepped forward, his voice breaking. Mom, stop. Everyone knows. I told them he didn't touch me. He didn't do anything. It was me. I just didn't want to admit it. Corinne stared at her son, her heart dropping. "Brandon," but he shook his head, tears welling. "You made it worse. You always make it worse. Why can't you just let things go?" The words echoed louder than any accusation. Neighbors glanced at one another, some whispering, others outright nodding. Desmond put a hand on Simone's shoulder and looked directly at Corinne. "Your son is young. He can learn. But your choices carry weight. You taught him that power means taking from others, and now he's paying for it." Angela stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "Do you know what it's like explaining this to our daughter? Do you know how it feels to see your child scared because someone painted her father as a threat? You didn't just call the police, you weaponized your influence, and for what? Groceries." Corinne opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, she looked around and realized the crowd wasn't on her side. Not this time. Not anymore. One of the neighbors, Linda Caraway, crossed her arms and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Corinne, we've lived with your HOA tactics for years, but this went too far. You don't get to bully people into your version of order." Another voice chimed in. "She needs to step down from the board." The murmurs grew louder, a chant of disapproval in everything but volume. Corinne stood frozen, her son's confession still ringing in her ears, her neighbor's stares cutting deep. Desmond closed his trunk, his tone final. "Mrs. Haskins, this conversation is over. What you do next is up to you, but I won't let my family be your target again." With that, he guided Angela and Simone into the car. The vehicle pulled away slowly, leaving Corinne standing in the middle of the lot, her authority crumbling with each whisper that followed. Brandon tugged at her sleeve, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, can we just go home?" Corinne swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the spot where the Carringtons' car had disappeared. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. But the internet wasn't finished with her yet. The parking lot drama was already fueling a nationwide conversation. By Monday morning, the videos from Fry's had gone from a neighborhood scandal to national news. Hashtags with Corinne's name trended on Twitter. Memes flooded Instagram, pairing screenshots of her pointing at Desmond with captions like, "Rules for thee, not for me." TikTok stitched her angry words with commentary from teenagers, comedians, and even activists who saw the footage as a symbol of something much bigger than groceries. Corinne sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, coffee untouched, scrolling through endless articles. Local HOA board member confronts police commander. Phoenix mother calls cops on her own police chief. Each headline made her stomach churn. Brandon walked in, backpack slung over his shoulder. "It's not just online, Mom. Kids at school won't stop. Someone printed a picture of me and taped it on my locker. They wrote Tradition Boy." His voice cracked with embarrassment. "Do you even get what you did to me?" Corinne looked up, defensive instinct ready to rise, but the sight of his tired eyes silenced her. "Brandon, I didn't mean for this to happen. I was just—" "Protecting me?" he snapped. "No, you were protecting yourself. You can't stand anyone telling you no. Not the neighbors. Not Dad when he left. Not anyone. And now you dragged me into it." Her lips parted, stunned by the sharpness in his tone. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, but deep down she knew he wasn't. Meanwhile, across town, Desmond sat in his office, his phone buzzing non-stop. News stations wanted interviews. City council members were requesting statements. His assistant leaned into the doorway. "Commander, CNN just called. They want you live tonight." Desmond pinched the bridge of his nose. "I didn't sign up to be a symbol. I just wanted to shop for dinner." Angela, seated on the couch in his office, raised an eyebrow. "But symbols don't ask to be symbols. They just become them. People saw restraint in you. They saw a family holding dignity in the face of hostility. That matters," Simone chimed in from the corner. "My friend said their parents talked about it at dinner. They said it's a lesson, that people need to stop judging before they know someone." Desmond gave a weary smile. "Out of the mouths of teenagers, huh?" That night, Corinne tuned into the local news. She saw Desmond's calm face on the screen, the anchor praising his composure. He didn't attack her by name. He didn't smear her reputation. Instead, he spoke broadly. "We live in communities that thrive when people treat one another with fairness. That means listening before assuming. That means respect. What happened in that parking lot could have escalated, but it didn't. And I'm grateful for that. Still, it shows how quickly misunderstandings can grow when judgment takes the place of conversation. Angela appeared briefly, her voice softer but firm. This isn't about punishment. It's about reflection. We all want safe neighborhoods, but safety isn't built on fear. It's built on trust. The broadcast ended with clips of neighbors interviewed outside the grocery store. Some criticized Corinne directly, calling her behavior unacceptable. Others said the entire HOA culture encouraged that kind of entitlement. The more people talked, the clearer it became. The Haskins family wasn't just in the middle of gossip. They were the epicenter of a cultural flashpoint. Corinne slammed her laptop shut, her pulse racing. She had built her entire identity on being the voice of order, the enforcer of standards, the one people looked to when things needed to be set right. And now, she was the example everyone mocked. Brandon's voice cut through her thoughts. "You should quit the board." Corinne looked at him sharply. "What?" "You should step down," he repeated. "They're already saying it at school. The neighbors want it. You're dragging us down with you. Don't you see that?" She stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "If I step down, they win. I'll look weak." Brandon slammed his hand on the counter, startling her. "You already look weak. Everyone sees it, Mom. The only way you don't lose completely is if you admit it." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, Corinne realized the battle she was fighting wasn't against her neighbors or even Desmond. It was against herself. Across social media, the story continued to grow. Clips of Brandon's confession in the parking lot began circulating too. One video captioned, "The Sun tells the truth," garnered millions of views. Sympathy poured in for him, while Corinne was painted as the villain in every frame. Even local comedians latched onto it. At a Phoenix comedy club, a stand-up quipped, "Imagine trying to steal a man's groceries and finding out he's your boss's boss's boss." The crowd roared. Corinne sat alone at her dining table later that night, lights dimmed, Brandon already asleep upstairs. She opened Facebook one last time. A neighbor had posted, "We need new leadership in our HOA, someone who understands fairness, not fear." Dozens of comments agreed. Her throat tightened. Everything she had built, everything she had controlled, was slipping through her fingers. But the harshest blow was still to come. Her own community was about to turn on her face to face. The next HO meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. Normally those meetings were sleepy affairs, grievances about weeds, complaints about trash bins, and the occasional argument over paint colors. But this time, the parking lot was overflowing long before the gavel was supposed to drop. News vans lined the street outside. Neighbors gathered in clumps, murmuring, eyes flicking toward the clubhouse doors like they were waiting for a heavyweight fight. Corinne pulled up in her SUV, Brandon sinking low in the passenger seat. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring at the crowd. "They're here because of the cameras," she muttered, convincing herself of half-truths. "This isn't about me. It's just spectacle." Brandon didn't answer. His silence said enough. Inside the air buzzed with tension. Every chair was filled. People stood along the back wall, their arms crossed, eyes locked on Corinne as she walked to her usual seat at the head table. She tried to sit tall, but the weight of their stares made her spine feel brittle. The HOA president, Richard Lomax, cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. "We'll call this meeting to order. I think we all know why attendance is so high tonight. Before we begin with business, Mrs. Haskins, several residents have requested you address the recent incident." A murmur spread. Phones tilted upward, recording. Corinne adjusted her blazer, leaned toward the microphone, and forced a smile. "Thank you, Richard. First, let me say that what happened at Fry's has been grossly exaggerated online. I acted as any mother would when her child was confronted by a stranger. My intentions were to protect my son, nothing more." The reaction was immediate. A man in the third row, Tom Ruiz, stood up. "Protecting your son?" He admitted himself that Commander Carrington never touched him. He told the truth. "You lied. That's not protection, that's manipulation." Applause broke out across the room. Corinne's face reddened. "I didn't lie. I made a judgment call with the information I had. A woman near the back, Angela Bishop, raised her voice. No, you made a judgment based on your bias, and then you dragged our whole neighborhood into it. Now we're all being painted as hostile and small-minded because of you. More murmurs, nods, and shouts of agreement. Corinne opened her mouth to defend herself, but the crowd's discontent drowned her out. Richard banged the gavel. Order, please. Let her finish. Corinne swallowed hard, gripping the microphone tighter. I regret how things escalated, but I won't apologize for standing up for my child. That set the room ablaze again. Tom Ruiz shouted over the din. No one asked you to apologize for being a parent. We're asking you to take responsibility for misusing your authority. This isn't the first time. You've used your position to intimidate neighbors for years. Notes on doors, threats of fines, endless policing of rules. And now, you went too far. The applause this time was louder, more unified. Corinne's eyes darted across the room. She spotted Brandon near the side wall, shifting uncomfortably, eyes downcast. He looked like he wanted to vanish. Richard leaned toward his microphone, his tone clipped. There's been a motion submitted by several members to call for your removal from the board, Corinne. If the room wishes to proceed, we can take a vote tonight. Gasps, followed by a roar of approval. Phones raised higher. Corinne's pulse pounded in her ears. She slammed her hand on the table. You can't just throw me out because of one mistake. A woman in the front row shot back. It wasn't one mistake. It was years of control. The video was just the breaking point. The words cut deep. Years of control. That was the truth she didn't want to face, now said out loud for everyone to hear. Before Richard could continue, the clubhouse doors opened. A hush fell over the room. Desmond Carrington walked in, Angela and Simone at his side. He hadn't planned to attend, but the flood of invitations and pleas from neighbors had finally worn him down. The crowd parted as the family made their way to the front. Desmond didn't take a seat. He stood, tall and calm, scanning the room before speaking. I didn't come here to demand anything. I came because communities fall apart when people stop talking and start assuming. What happened in that parking lot wasn't just about groceries. It was about power, and about how quickly assumptions can escalate. Angela added, her voice clear. We're not here to punish, but we do want fairness. If we want this neighborhood to thrive, we have to hold each other accountable. That includes those in charge. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with realization. Neighbors shifted, some wiping tears, others nodding. Even Brandon looked up at his mother, silently begging her to see what was right in front of her. Corinne stared at the Carringtons, her throat tight. For once she had no sharp retort, no rule to cite, no authority to wield. Just the truth pressing down on her from every angle. Richard cleared his throat again. We'll take the vote now. Hands shot into the air across the room, overwhelming in number. Corinne didn't even bother to count. She knew. But the vote wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her reckoning, and the moment she would be forced to face her own son's hardest question yet. The vote to remove Corinne from the HOA board wasn't even close. By the time Richard lowered his gavel and announced the result, the room had already erupted in chatter, some relieved, some angry, most simply resigned. Corinne sat frozen at the head table, her lips pressed tight, her fingers digging into the wooden armrests of her chair. Brandon slipped out before the meeting officially ended, his shoulders hunched as he headed toward the car. He didn't want to see his mother break down, didn't want to be trapped in the middle of another storm. Corinne followed minutes later, ignoring the neighbors who avoided her eyes, ignoring the ones who didn't bother to hide their smirks. The ride home was silent, heavy, suffocating. Brandon stared out the passenger window, watching the streetlights streak by. Finally he spoke, his voice flat but sharp. So, how does it feel? Corinne glanced at him, startled. What do you mean? To lose? To not be in charge? He turned toward her now, his face pale, his eyes dark. Because this is what it feels like for me every time you try to control everything. Every time you speak for me. Every time you make decisions before I can even think for myself. Corinne gripped the wheel tighter. Brandon, I was protecting you, he scoffed. No. You were protecting yourself, your image, your pride. You didn't even ask me what happened that day. You just assumed I was the victim, because in your world, we can't ever be wrong." The words stung worse than the public humiliation at the meeting. She wanted to lash back, to defend herself, but she couldn't. He was right. She hadn't asked. She never asked. Brandon leaned back in his seat, his voice quieter now. "I'm the one who started it. I demanded his groceries. I embarrassed myself. But instead of helping me own that, you doubled down. And now everyone knows." Corinne blinked hard, her throat tight. For the first time she saw the weight she had piled on her son, the entitlement, the arrogance, the blind certainty that rules bent in their favor. She had raised him not to be honest, but to be dominant. And now he was drowning in it. Back at the house, Brandon went straight upstairs. Corinne sat alone in the living room, staring at the walls covered with HOA commendations, certificates, plaques from years of service. They all looked meaningless now, hollow relics of a woman who had mistaken control for leadership. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from her sister in Tucson. "Corinne, you need to stop. Admit you were wrong. Don't let this define Brandon's future. Please." She dropped the phone back onto the table and buried her face in her hands. For once she had no clever response, no excuse, no one to call to fix it. Just silence. Meanwhile, in another part of Phoenix, Desmond sat with Angela and Simone at their kitchen table. They ate takeout quietly until Angela finally spoke. "Do you think she'll learn from this?" Desmond sighed. "I don't know. Some people learn when they're humbled. Others just harden." He glanced at Simone, who was picking at her food. "But what matters is the example we set for her. She needs to see that dignity doesn't come from power, it comes from honesty." Simone looked up, her eyes wide. "Are we safe here? In this neighborhood?" Angela reached over and squeezed her hand. "We're safe because we stand together. No one can take that from us." The next day, Corinne tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. She trimmed the hedges in front of her house, waved at a neighbor walking a dog, even left a note about a trash bin left too close to the curb. But instead of respect, she was met with avoidance. The neighbor with the dog crossed the street. The homeowner crumpled her note and tossed it into the bin without reading it. It was then she realized the truth. She no longer held authority here. Not on the board, not among her peers, not even in the eyes of her son. She had lost the one thing she valued most: control. That evening, Brandon sat at the kitchen table, his books spread out in front of him. Corinne stood in the doorway watching. For once, she didn't correct his posture, didn't tell him to organize the papers, didn't remind him about deadlines. She simply stood, trying to find the right words. Finally, she spoke. "Brandon, I failed you." He looked up, confused. "I taught you to demand instead of to ask, to win instead of to listen, to control instead of to understand. And it's not your fault. It's mine. I made you believe that's how strength works. But it isn't." Brandon stared at her, his eyes searching. "So what now?" Corinne took a shaky breath. "Now, we change, or at least, I try to." The silence stretched. But for the first time in days, it wasn't suffocating. It was hopeful, fragile, like the very first step across thin ice. But the real test would come not inside their home, but in how the entire neighborhood responded to her next move. The weekend after the HOA vote, the neighborhood gathered again, this time not for confrontation, but for the annual block cookout at the community park. Normally, Corinne was the one organizing the grill schedule, assigning tables, and making sure no one dared to bring paper plates that didn't match the approved HOA aesthetic. But this year, Richard Lomax stood at the front with a clipboard, giving instructions while Corinne lingered near the back like a ghost in her own territory. Brandon didn't even want to come. He had argued with her the entire morning. "Why would we go? Everyone hates us." But Corinne insisted. "We go because hiding only makes it worse. People need to see that we're still here, that we're willing to face them." When they arrived, the looks were exactly what Brandon had feared. Some neighbors whispered, others turned away entirely. Kids pointed and giggled, and even adults avoided meeting Corinne's eyes. The very same people who once feared her HOA notes now dismissed her as irrelevant. At the far end of the park, Desmond stood talking with a few officers who had stopped by for community engagement. Angela was arranging plates of food, Simone helping hand out bottled water. They moved comfortably among the neighbors, their presence welcomed, their laughter genuine. Corinne felt the sting of envy, the ache of watching someone else hold the respect she once commanded. But this time, instead of reaching for authority, she reached for humility. She nudged Brandon. "Come with me." They walked toward Desmond. The crowd around them parted slightly, not out of respect but curiosity. Everyone wanted to see what she would do. Corinne stopped a few feet away, cleared her throat, and spoke in a voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Commander Carrington, may I have a word?" The park seemed to hush. Desmond turned, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Mrs. Haskins." Corinne glanced at Brandon, then back at Desmond. Her lips trembled before she forced the words out. "I owe you, and your family, an apology. I let my pride and assumptions blind me. I should have corrected my son instead of escalating the situation. I failed as a neighbor, and I failed as a parent. I'm sorry." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Corinne Haskins, the woman who never admitted fault, was apologizing. Brandon watched her, stunned, his chest tightening with a mix of disbelief and relief. Angela stepped closer, her eyes sharp but not cruel. "Do you mean that, or are you just saving face?" Corinne met her gaze. "I mean it. I can't undo what I did, but I can own it, and I want to do better. For him." She placed a hand lightly on Brandon's shoulder. Brandon, cheeks flushed, finally spoke. "Commander, I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have demanded anything from you. I thought I was being tough, but I was just being selfish." Desmond studied them both for a long moment. The silence was heavy, the entire neighborhood waiting for his response. Finally, he nodded once. "Acknowledging mistakes is harder than pretending they don't exist." "I respect that." Angela crossed her arms, her tone softening. "What matters now is whether you live it. Words mean little if actions don't follow." Corinne nodded quickly. "I understand." The Carringtons turned back to the cookout, and while they didn't embrace Corinne, they didn't dismiss her either. The neighbors murmured, some skeptical, others cautiously hopeful. For the first time in weeks, the tension in the air eased just slightly. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and neighbors packed up folding chairs, Brandon sat beside his mother on the curb. For once, he wasn't scowling. "Mom," he said softly, "I think people actually heard you." Corinne let out a shaky laugh. "I think they heard me because I finally said what mattered." She paused, her voice quieter. "You were right, Brandon. About me always needing control. About me never asking. I don't want to keep being that person." He looked at her carefully. "So what now?" She smiled faintly. "Now we rebuild. Not by running meetings or handing out fines. By listening. By admitting when we're wrong. By starting over." Brandon leaned against her shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, the heaviness between them lifted. Across the park, Desmond watched quietly as he loaded the last cooler into his trunk. Angela noticed his gaze. "Do you think she'll change?" Desmond shrugged. "I don't know, but I know her son will remember this, and maybe that's enough to break the cycle." Angela slipped her hand into his. "Then maybe something good came from all this after all." The Carringtons drove home together, the neighborhood quieter, the atmosphere softer than it had been in weeks. For Corinne, the road to redemption would be long, but that evening marked the first honest step. She had spent years teaching others how to follow rules, but it took one humiliating mistake to finally teach herself the hardest lesson of all, that respect can't be demanded. It has to be earned. And that's the real message here. Control doesn't build community. Humility does. If we want stronger neighborhoods, stronger families, stronger lives, we have to listen before we judge, admit when we're wrong, and choose respect over pride. So if this story struck something in you, if it made you think about how we treat others when we hold power, then let's carry that lesson forward. And if you'd like more stories that challenge the way we see the world, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the next one might just change the way you see yourself.